The Russian sleep experiment, truth behind the story. When the researchers entered the chamber, they were confronted with an unimaginable scene of misery. The human subjects had peeled themselves apart. One was found dead and butchered. Others had flesh ripped off their chests and faces. Their bare bones were released through their fingertips. This was not how the experiment was meant to go, the scientists told themselves. Some of you may have heard of the Russian sleep experiment carried out by the Soviets during World War II in 1940. Over the years, the Soviets have hidden numerous secrets. They nearly covered up the Chernobyl disaster. But one of my favorite World War II stories is about a Russian sleep experiment. When it all started. In 1940, researchers in the Soviet Union developed the formula for a stimulant to prevent sleep. Imagine the wonders that soldiers can do with such a stimulant during World War II. It wasn't a new concept either. During World War II, the Germans used a stimulant called Pervitin to prevent sleep. The Americans and the British also had their form of a stimulant called Benzedrine. The Soviets wanted to improve on a known stimulant and use their version of it. The stimulant had to be put to the test on humans. They picked 5 soldiers of various ages who had been captured during World War II. As long as war captives were considered, no one bothered about ethical issues. The subjects were kept in a sealed chamber where the stimulant was to be released as a gas. They were given a supply of dry food. Each person was given a single bed with no bedding. There was also a single toilet in the room with running water. They were offered a free life if they would give up 30 days of their lives. They accepted the agreement without hesitation. They had no clue what fate awaited them. The researchers monitored their test subjects through 5-inch wide glasses that linked the chamber to the viewing room, and installed microphones in the chamber to listen to their subjects. They went through the first 3 days of the experiment without experiencing any problems. The men appeared to be in good health. They conversed with one another. The experiment was going well, and the research had progressed. The experiment did not went as planned. The 4th day was when everything started to go sideways. The participants were debating strange topics. They discussed the battles they had fought, the horrors they had witnessed, and the trauma they had experienced. They began to discuss the nightmares they had faced during World War II. Although it was so unusual, the researchers were not concerned. Things got a bit uglier the next day. The subjects went into psychosis and began chatting with themselves. As they became paranoid of one another, they began whispering about each other into the microphones. Their minds eventually began to deceive them. After the 6th day, their thoughts turned against them. They experienced horrific hallucinations that they felt every second of. And this time, they caught the audience's attention. In the provided conditions, the researcher figured that the behavior was out of the ordinary. The researcher spoke about what triggered this behavior. It was possible that the sleep loss or the gas itself was to blame. There were a few words said, but no progress was made. They decided to continue the experiment to try to figure out what was causing the problem. Days passed, and the Russian sleep experiment became increasingly terrible. On the 9th day of the experiment, a patient began screaming and running around in the chamber like a headless animal. He was going insane, and there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. He shouted for hours continuously, tearing his vocal cords in the process. As terrible as that sounds, it was hardly the most horrifying event of the day. After that incident, the patient was found sleeping on the floor, which concerned the researchers the most. Their situation was worsening day by day. And then, something unexpected occurred to the subjects after a few days. The men in the room went extremely quiet. The researchers yelled over the speakers that they were on their way to check in. And that if the subjects behaved, one of them would be released immediately. One of the chambered subjects murmured into the microphone, telling the researchers that they no longer desired freedom. For the chamber, the gas supply was completely blocked. And fresh air was blown into the chamber to replace the gas. The inmates began to scream and cry for the gas. The researchers were concerned that the subjects had become addicted to the stimulant. The first casualty. They didn't have much of a choice except to enter the room. That's when they discovered their prisoners in a horrifying condition. They found one been slaughtered and the others with severe injuries. Their guts were stretched wide open. Their flesh was peeled off their bodies and faces. The blood was streaming from the exposed finger bones. They'd lost a lot of blood. Their wounds appeared to have been caused by themselves. The researchers fled, alerting the guards to take the patients into the operation room. The prisoners attacked the soldiers as soon as they entered the cell. One of the attackers slashed the throat of a soldier. Even when a prisoner bled out fighting, he still pleaded for the stimulant in his last moments. When the prisoners were apprehended, they were given a hefty dose of sedatives. However, the sedative did not work for some reason. So, they had to be chained to the beds. This was never supposed to happen. Even though they didn't want to accept it, the Nazis, Americans, and British were a step ahead of them this time. The doctors attempted to treat the first patient, but when given an anesthetic, they accidentally killed him. So, they chose to operate on the others without sedation. Doctors discovered 9 fractured bones and practically every major muscle torn apart as they attempted to treat a patient. The other wasn't in the best of shape either. During the surgery, the surgeons overheard them saying bizarre things. They kept asking for the stimulant. At that time, a former military operative in the room proposed that the test subjects be returned to the chamber for further testing. That option only made sense at the moment. Only when the subjects were on stimulant withdrawal did they get aggressive. They were simply paranoid but not destructive while on the stimulant. Last man standing. The test subjects were strapped to their beds and returned to the program. The EEG monitor of one patient suddenly displayed a high level of brain activity before he died chained next to the last man remaining. The count was now down to 1. The scientist rushed inside the chamber. They were standing over the body of the deceased patient when they overheard the final patient talking to himself. In that facility, there were 2 researchers and a guard. One of the researchers grew paranoid and pulled out his gun, aiming it towards the patient. The guard jumped to his feet to prevent him from murdering the prisoner. The researcher killed the guard and then opened fire on the patient. Surprisingly, the patient survived. The researcher's paranoia worsened. "What are you?" he asked with his voice shaking. The prisoner responded as the monster you created before being shot for a final time.